Hi, welcome to Variety Tech Today. If you like vintage tech, especially vintage home theater tech, you'll love this episode. This is about Laserdiscs. Now, Laserdisc came out in the 70s, and the original name for it was Disco Vision. That obviously is a title that's very dated and would not hold up well. So it actually had several different titles that also served to confuse the market because there was a competing format that used a physical needle like an old record to play back video. But Laserdisc obviously has the longer lifespan. And for instance, here's an old copy of The Sound of Music, and you'll notice it says Laser Video Disc. But in a small logo it says Laserdisc. That's really the title that stuck. And Laserdisc were two-sided, and this copy of The Sound of Music, being a long movie as it is, has two-sided discs. Fortunately, some players had the ability to switch sides automatically, so you didn't have to flip the disc over. Here's another example of the Laser Video Disc branding. This one says Laser Vision in the logo, places in the heart. And let's take a look at the opening logo, why don't we? Played straight from the Laserdisc player. Disney also released many of their titles to Laserdisc. There's the Shaggy Dog, Walt Disney Home Video logo. That's what they would also use for VHS releases and later DVDs early on. But here's an interesting title. It's Lady and the Tramp. Now, first off, before I get into this, let me tell you that the aspect ratio was old-fashioned 4:3, roughly a square, which was the shape of most TVs back then. So most Laserdisc titles were in that pan and scan cropped format, or in some cases open matte. And if you want to know what that means, you can watch my episode about aspect ratios. So anyway, some Laserdisc titles were widescreen, but they had the black bars added at the top and bottom. This caused lower resolution, but at the same time allowed you to see the full theatrical picture as it was intended. There were some Laserdisc titles that squished the whole widescreen picture into a 4:3 frame that could be stretched to fill widescreen televisions at a better resolution, but I believe those were only in Japan. So anyway, getting back to Lady and the Tramp, this movie itself is interesting when it comes to aspect ratios because it was made at this time period where widescreen was newer. So when it was theatrically released, they actually released it in two different formats. It was released in a scope wide, extra wide aspect ratio, which, by the way, was much wider than many scope movies made after that, even nowadays. It was unusually wide. But for theaters that didn't have that, they also released a traditional square-shaped ratio. The thing was, though, it wasn't cropped like many were. In fact, both the widescreen and the full-screen versions both had instances where one had more picture than the other, either on the sides or on the top and bottom, depending on the shot and the framing they decided on. The Blu-ray and the Disney Plus HD streaming version naturally includes the widescreen version, as do the DVDs. However, that original theatrical full-screen version, which itself has unique content on the tops and bottoms of some scenes, has pretty much been lost to history. However, it was released on Laserdisc once. However, note that most Laserdisc releases with a full-screen version are simply pan and scan versions. This one, however, is the original theatrical full-screen version, though. You know how you know? Tramp is looking away. If he's looking at Lady, it's just a cropped version. If he's looking away, this is the rare original theatrical full-screen version. Now moving on to Star Wars, here is the release of the original trilogy. These are pretty nice because they, just like old record albums, with Laserdisc you got a huge area for this square artwork, and you get the original theatrical posters, the paintings, for A New Hope, as it was called the year after its release, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Now all of these Laserdisc versions are pan and scan. However, later Laserdisc would be released with the full scope ratio letterboxed. And this set in particular is interesting. This is the Widescreen Trilogy Special Edition. Now it's Special Edition for a couple of reasons. One would be the packaging. This has beautiful packaging. This nice vinyl matte finish. More artwork. These were the theatrical posters from their re-releases in the 90s, made just for that. A book with more artwork inside and the full scene selections, just like they used to do with DVDs later on. And then you've got these black and silver protective envelopes for every disc. But the main reason it's called Special Edition is because that's what the updated versions of the movies were called. You might recall that before the prequel trilogy started, George Lucas made some updates to the original trilogy and re-released them in theaters. But what you might not know is that those original special editions are not available on Blu-ray or other current home media. That's because he continued to update them up until 2019, when the final cuts were released on Disney Plus in 4K. However, the first versions of these special editions, the 1.0s if you will, were released on this Laserdisc set in widescreen. One notable example of early change would be the new scene of Jabba the Hutt inserted into Episode 4. He appeared for the first time in computer animation, but in later versions of the special edition that computer animation was redone to make it look better, as it was still evolving at the time. Letterbox versions of the original unaltered trilogy were also released on Laserdisc, and they were released on DVD once in these limited edition DVDs that had a second disc where the original version was sort of an extra, if you will. But this wasn't a new transfer. It was, in fact, sourced from the Laserdisc release, so it was letterbox and it was lower resolution and not as high quality as it could have been. Now here's another even more obscure Star Wars Laserdisc release. Remember the Ewoks? Besides having their own animated TV series that aired for 2 seasons, they also had 2 TV movies. In fact, the movies were theatrical overseas. These are more rare. This is the Ewok Adventure and its sequel, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor. Now what's interesting about this first one is that the actual title that was in the overseas release was Caravan of Courage, an Ewok Adventure. And on the DVD that had both movies, released in 2004, that full title was used. However, in the United States release, the title was simply The Ewok Adventure, and the Laserdisc is where you get that original title. And finally, there's one more interesting Laserdisc I want to show you. It includes 3D. This is the Jeds. It's all about their song Love Can Build a Bridge. It includes a behind-the-scenes featurette and then the 3D music video itself. Now there was an actual 3D video disc format that was released in Japan that used shutter glasses, just like modern day ones, for true full-color real 3D from actual stereo content. But this utilized a more universal format, not anaglyph, but pull frick. Now if you want to know what pull frick is, you want to watch my other episode about unusual 3D formats. But all I'll say now is that it requires constant sideways movement to get a 3D effect, and it requires one eye to be darkened. In this case, they darken the right eye, and you see through the left eye. And these are the glasses that came with the Laserdisc, by the way. You might notice that the left eye has a very slight green hue to it, but this really serves no purpose. It could be clear, it could have no lens at all, and you get the same effect. All it is really is about having a slightly darkened right eye lens, or in other cases left eye. In this case, it's the right eye. So how did it turn out? Well, it has the usual errors that inevitably crop into pull frick 3D presentations. If you ever got vertical movement, it looks horrible. If you get movement in the opposite of the intended direction, which a couple shots actually did do blatantly, you get inverted depth, which is the opposite of what you want. But I think by and large they did a pretty good job. When you've got that slow sideways movement, especially the shots of the judge singing when they're standing on the mountain, and you've got that great parallax of the background moving swiftly behind them, that worked very well. And when pull frick is done well, it's actually the closest you can get on a non-3D display to seeing that full color clear 3D. So this was definitely an interesting title for sure.
Yes, folks, the Jets are now 3D. 3D.
Was this your idea?
It was my idea, actually. This whole thing really was my idea. All the time that I have off, I just sit in my room and think of these things.
It did not. It's the guy right here.
Well, no one seems to be too happy with the idea after a couple of weeks of shooting.
A couple of months ago, Ken Stilts, who manages the Jets, came to us with a kind of a unique idea, which was to do the very first 3D music video for network television. Country music in general has a sort of an undeserved reputation for not really being a technologically advanced, cutting-edge kind of medium. And we thought, this is perfect, chance to do a first. It should open a few eyes and get people talking a little bit, because it hasn't been done before. There's never really been a full-on 3D music video piece.
You ever seen It's a Mad, 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 Mad World? It's a nice, epic, and funny movie. Here's a Laserdisc release of it. This was in a shorter 2-hour and 35-minute running time version. It's also pan and scan. Later on Laserdisc it was released in an extended version with scenes from the premiere reinserted after many years. And this was also in letterbox widescreen format. It's also in deluxe packaging, not the usual sleeve, with the lid and artwork on the inside with scene selections. It wouldn't be until many years later that it was finally released on Blu-ray in an extended version from the Criterion Collection, which included an even longer 197-minute cut, which is 3 hours and 17 minutes. Alright, I'll see you next time.